Okay, thank you. And then I'll share my screen. Let's see, slideshow from the beginning. Can everybody see the title screen fine?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, as you're all muted. Yeah. Okay. I named this presentation Justifying the Challenge to Realize Its Full Potential. We're talking about AREDN mesh in Southern California. My approach will be probably a little different than many of the videos that are out there. There are dozens of them. My approach comes from the perspective of, you could say, end user, you could say the community organizer, the person, the liaison with the emergency management staff of the city of Anaheim. So looking at it from those perspectives, that's where this presentation kind of comes from. The others that you'll find on YouTube and various other places can get very technical. I wouldn't consider myself to be an expert with AREDN. I would say that, you know, I have a very firm understanding and a good amount of experience in installing and using not only the networking equipment, but the services. And I think that that when it comes to the services and the practicality of AREDN mesh, that my presentation will be more applicable to the average user of AREDN. So that's just to give you kind of a background of where we're heading with this. I could easily take up 2 hours. I'm gonna try to narrow it down to less than an hour to give you guys a chance to ask questions. And I don't mind if you jump in, just raise your hand, you know, or wave, and I'll try to pay attention to you so that I can address those. Or I do have time at the end after the demo. I will show you some things in real time to answer any specific questions. So like I said, this isn't going to be a technical discussion. It's going to be more of a practical discussion. Okay. So the justification, you know, why do you need AREDN? It's a data network when all other networks are not operational. You know, your gigabit internet that you've got in your neighborhood goes down. You know, your cell phones are out, and you know all other practical data networks are down, or in the case of a major power outage or an earthquake or whatever, they're completely overloaded. It is predicted that if we have, or when we have our major 8.0 earthquake, that all the cell phone networks will be non-operational because they will be completely overloaded with people calling and being called from other areas of the country and the world asking, you know, if they're okay. The AREDN data network will provide a data network when those things are overloaded. Currently, I'm going to tell you who locally is using this. The city of Irvine has a very intricate network in the for AREDN networking. They connected all of their local high schools, which happen to be their disaster centers, together with AREDN. They have cameras and phones and data connections between all of those centers. And they're also connected to the greater AREDN mesh network. So they have their network towers are at the top of hilltops, and they're on buildings, and they're also at each member's home throughout the city. Tri-City Races is down in South County. That's San Clemente, Dana Point, and San Juan Capistrano. Their setup's a little different. Everything they do is portable. They've got some really interesting go boxes down there. I've learned a lot, and you know, continue to work with Bill Kruger. I'm saying it wrong. Bill K. I'll just say KM6 SLF down there, who's their AREDN expert. He's made some interesting little boxes. Costa Mesa CERT is kind of new in the AREDN world, but they've used it in the past to provide video feeds to the fire department during, most recently, the Orange County Marathon that I was at. Directly across the street from the EOC, but you know, they did it with AREDN as a proof of concept, and it works great. And throughout the country, especially, you know, here in Southern California, like with LAXRs and you know, across the nation, there's literally dozens of other organizations like Anaheim Races or any of the Oxcom groups doing this across the nation. We actually have a nationwide link that is available in case if we need to have a nationwide connection. And I don't know how they're doing it, but there's a worldwide connection that can be turned on if it's needed. The out of area connections are usually turned off because if they were on full time, the AREDN network would just become too large. It would overburden everybody's routers. So the challenge that we have here locally is that we have a limited number of high point nodes. Those are places like Pleasants Peak, Santiago Peak, Mount Wilson, and others like that. They, you know, AREDN's not new at all. It's been around probably 20 years, and before that, at the time 20 years ago, it was called the HamNet. It was later repurposed and pretty much the same code base, but it was repurposed into AREDN. The guys at AREDN, the software developers at AREDN who are up in Los Angeles, they can tell you everything about the history and the code, and I don't know anything about it, but that's kind of the gist of where it came from. So, you know, I mentioned that there's a limited number of high points, and not because I say it because when people think of AREDN, if they don't know anything about it, the first impression that they would get is like a repeater network, that, you know, you have a limited number of repeaters as well. And if we just, you know, if we can at least reach the repeater, then we're good. But just like any radio repeater network, the more people you have on the same node, the more it's overloaded, and eventually it's just not going to work. So I encourage those that are interested in AREDN not to rely upon the high level nodes, but rather to start at a community level and to only connect out to the high nodes where necessary to connect a neighborhood, for example, with the greater AREDN mesh. And that's what I'm encouraging in the city of Anaheim with the Anaheim Race Use members. Another challenge that we have is that the frequencers are shared with consumer and commercial devices, especially in the 2.4 gigahertz area. Well, no, especially in the 3 gigahertz, which is now completely shared with consumers. But I don't know a whole lot of consumers that have 3 gigahertz routers at home. It's more or less, you know, commercial devices that are using those, but it is shared. So on the 2 gigahertz spectrum, you've got every single router since routers existed. And in the 5G area, you know, you're going to share it with the newer devices. Fortunately, both in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, we have an allocation of channels, which I'll show you in a minute, which are reserved for amateur use only. And another obvious, you know, challenge that we have here, especially Fullerton, because you guys are up against the foothills. You've got buildings and hills that are in your way of really reaching probably Mount Wilson. You might have troubles reaching Pleasants Peak. I'll give you an example. You know, one of our Anaheim Race Use members lives in Yorba Linda, not too far from one of your members, by the way, and I'll show you that on the map. And we tried 2 gigahertz, we tried 5 gigahertz, which is both are available at Pleasants Peak, and we settled on 3 gigahertz because the channels were so overloaded with activity at the Pleasants Peak area that that's the only thing that would work. And so, by the way, I do encourage the 3 gigahertz for long range connections because of that. There's so much stuff up there. Okay, so I mentioned, you know, I'll just briefly show you that these are the spectrums that we're allowed to use and what we share with others. So no one's using 900 megahertz anymore. You've probably heard of LoRa and some other things like that. Those are really kind of hobbyist frequencies, but you know, technically they're Wi-Fi. So in the 2.4, we usually use the -2 and the -1 channels that are not viewable at all on any home router. They're never going to see it. They're not going to interfere with us, but there could be some bleed over from the channel 1, which is, you know, kind of a default for some of the old routers. In the 3 gigahertz spectrum, you can see here that it's all across. You know, we're sharing everything. Each one of the routers nodes is going to use a different channel. So there's plenty of them here. And we got the 5 gigahertz spectrum, which is just all over the place, right? This is, if you've ever looked at the channels in your home router, you probably recognize some of these. But there's still plenty in here. that we can use on our own that will stay out of the way of the consumers. The potential here of what you can do with AREDN is described here. You know, you read it on this, you can do phones, conferencing, video surveillance, and I'll show you some of these things later on, you know, chat, file sharing, and so forth. And we've used all of these things during field day, and we do use these things during exercises, like the Orange County RACES countywide drills coming up. We'll use some of these things over AREDN. So what can you guys do to help? You can help by building up the infrastructure from house to house. Now, let me zoom in on this map here, because I just took a guess at where you guys live based on your call signs. The red markers on the map here indicate where I think you guys approximately live. And the yellow markers here on the map are where the Anaheim RACES team lives approximately. And if you notice, some of you guys are pretty close together. Like up here in the Yorba Linda area, you're within a half mile of one of our members. That member may be interested in working with over here with Richard. Is he here tonight? Not sure. So, but you can see here, this is the spread, and I'm sure you guys have other members. It's just this came from the one of the pages of your website. So the more you've got close together, the more that you can actually do house to house mesh networking, and that's what I recommend. So my associate up here, Dick Palm, KN6RVU, has a link to Pleasants Peak. Not represented here on the map, but just up the street from here, there's another link to Pleasants Peak. So we have a double link up here in Yorba Linda. It's a little difficult getting all the way from Yorba Linda to downtown Anaheim, but that's the eventual plan, is that we'll have something up on City Hall pointing in all four directions, but that's probably years away. It's just bureaucracy, and that is a problem everywhere, you know, dealing with governments and you know, the local bureaucrats of every place. So how do we build it out? Is we build it out by house to house to start with, and by linking up with people like Dick, and there's a few others that have long range links to get into the greater AREDN mesh. So we're going to use smaller nodes on our homes. We're going to use sector nodes on buildings and existing towers that you may be able to have permission to add to. Think about your Fullerton repeaters that you already have access to, and dishes where you need to connect to the greater mesh. And I'll give you a quick snapshot of the greater mesh. This is a worldwide map, and there we go. Those are the nodes all over the world, and especially here in California, we have a ton of them. So, yeah, I may realize that the map is not zoomed in, but you know that there really are a lot. There's literally thousands. When you live in a place like I do, where there's just absolutely no way to get a RF connection to a neighbor or up to a hilltop, you can use internet tunnels, and basically it's a router that's been loaded with the special firmware for the AREDN mesh, and then we create VPN tunnels between us to get onto the greater mesh, and I will show you that later. What do you need? Just a technician license, line of sight, free of obstructions. Very important. The equipment for house-to-house stuff is pretty cheap. You can just do, I've got several nodes that I use for portable use. If I had a house, I would just put this up on the roof, but this is just an example of one of the nodes. This device is about 6 inches tall. It'll mount on a pole. It's $40, and you add this with the MikroTik half light, which is the actual routing device, switch included, and you're online. You can go with this device and others like it. You can easily go 5 to 10 miles line of sight. We use these things out at sites when we're doing field days for phone connectivity and things like that. The other one here is the same but it's at the 5 gigahertz spectrum. These are TP links. They're the cheapest of the brands. They work fine. There's actually a supported platform matrix up on the AREDN website that will tell you all the devices that could work. I recommend, reaching out to the community to, join the forums and ask other people, present them with your situation and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you guys recommend? And you'll get plenty of options and opinions on that. And you can ask me, you can ask Don Hill, there's a few people that are very knowledgeable of this. Now, whatever you decide, maybe you don't want to put something on the roof yet, maybe you just want to play around with the AREDN mesh, buy the MikroTik half-light. This little guy right here, we call it the Swiss Army knife of the AREDN mesh. And the reason for that is that at its base, it is able to create internet tunnels. So all you need is an internet connection and this guy right here and a friend like me to create a tunnel to the AREDN mesh, and now you're on the mesh. Now you later, when you want to add an antenna, you add it to port 5, which becomes the DTD to the antenna, and now you've got RF. So you can take these things with you. You can connect IP phones to them, cameras, whatever you want to put on there. And this will help you bridge your home network with the AREDN mesh. So I highly recommend it if you're curious to get one of these. They're a pain to get loaded. So ask somebody like me that knows how to load them, or read the manuals step by step, follow them exactly, and go through the same pain that we all did, and you'll get it eventually. It took me a couple hours on the first try. I'm down to about 15 minutes on new ones. How do you get to the greater mesh? Well, dishes. That's how you're going to get out there. This is a dish sitting on top of, it's not a real AREDN dish, but it looks exactly like one. It's sitting on some high top tower someplace just to represent how it's going to connect two parts of a geographic area together. These dishes are capable of going 30 to 50 miles, depending on how big they are, the power. Microwave dishes are nothing new. It's just that now we're able to use these things, and some of the links we have in the AREDN mesh are 60, 70 miles. The farthest that I've gotten with one of these connections has been about 15 miles reliably. But I've got the low-end MikroTik stuff. If you buy the higher brand, name brand stuff like Ubiquiti, you're going to get that much farther long-range stuff. Even if you have a dish for long range, you're still going to use your MikroTik router for your internal routing. So that's why I always say get the Swiss Army knife. And I mentioned here in my notes, and I'm going to share these notes with everybody later. So if I'm going too fast, you'll be able to go through it slower on your own. Again, I can't say it enough. Don't depend on those high point. If everybody does it, then it's not good for the network. Get 1 or 2 people that need to do that to connect to the high points, and then share that with everybody. You are going to need a somewhat advanced knowledge of TCP/IP networking, to get this thing working on your home network. If you just hook it up to one computer, straight off of one of those nodes, or straight with the MikroTik, you're fine. Where it gets complicated is when you start to try to get other devices on your network working, like cameras and other computers, and then you realize that the DNS is not working, and there's a whole bunch of little challenges there. So it helps if you're a network engineer, but you don't have to be. There's plenty of help available. Okay, no matter how you're connecting to somebody else, remember the Fresnel zone. The Fresnel zone is that little area below where the antenna spread is. You see line of sight with the dashed line here. That's if the two antennas are looking straight at each other. But right below, there's this Fresnel zone. Anything in the path of the Fresnel zone is going to degrade the signal, and it's significant. So any trees, like really thick trees, a light tree, it probably won't do much, but thick trees will definitely have an effect on the line of sight. And of course, if there's any small hills or buildings in the way, that even if they're in the Fresnel zone, that'll significantly drop the signal quality. There's a couple of websites that I reference here. One of them is Ubiquity's link planning website. And I'll show you a map that we actually made of it later on for field day. But this website lets you actually pick 2 points on a map and then put 2 pieces of equipment across those 2 points, and it will show you the strength that is predicted, the speed that's predicted, and so forth. Another one is, hey, what's that? You guys probably have seen this before. You can pick any place on a map and you can plot what the typical RF spread would be of that area. This is very useful for figuring out whether or not you're going to be able to make it to a hilltop or across the city. I love this. I told you that we made a map, so I'm going to actually show you that map. So for our AREDN field day this year, Anaheim Races, we were over at Ronald Reagan Park up in the hills. That's my cat. We were 4 miles away from Dick's house in Yorba Linda. We had a little bit of Fresnel interference from some low shrub trees, but we still had a solid connection. It was about a 25 megabit connection over 4 miles with dishes that are similar to the ones that you can see here. We were able to use our IP phones to make phone calls across the mesh network. We had IP cameras running at the site, and we also were able to access IP cameras elsewhere. We did WinLink tests. We were working mesh chat. Mesh chat is actually what we use to coordinate all of the phone calls, and I'll show you mesh chat later. And we had internet because at Dick's house, he shared his internet WAN connection with his AREDN node connection, thereby opening up a port to the internet. Now, I mentioned, this stuff is designed to work where the internet doesn't work. Well, it's also designed where you have a regional outage. So if you've got a connection to the greater AREDN mesh network and you have a regional outage, such as in the county of Orange, but you've got an AREDN connection that reaches all the way into LA, but their systems haven't gone down, you potentially still have internet. That's one of the great features of it. So you can still possibly get on the internet. Not guaranteed. If you get one of these microticks or any of these nodes, one school of thought says that you should not share your internet connection. They say it could be used maliciously. The other school of thought is that you should leave it on at all times because you never know when we're gonna have a disaster. And the last thing you want to be doing when that disaster happens is figuring out whether or not your WAN connection is working. I agree with the second one. And so do the people who have the infrastructure at the hilltops. So you'll hear it both ways. So let me just show you this map. I haven't seen any hands up yet. Okay. All right. This is the plot between Dick's house, and you can see. Can you guys see the yellow area here where it's hitting the top of the hill in the Fresnel zone? I'm not sure if maybe I can make this bigger. Here we go.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Yeah, you see that right there though? That's hitting the Fresnel zone on his side. So it did have an effect on the signal, not to mention all the trees and such that were present on the high side of this link. We had a bunch of pine trees over there, and in between, not a whole lot. But so the rest of this link was perfect, except the very beginning, and but the predicted connection from Ubiquity was 50 megabits. It was actually more like 25. And again, it could have been that we're not using Ubiquity stuff. It could have just been that, this is in an optimal vacuum under ideal temperatures, and it was pretty hot that day. Everything is a factor, but even 25 megabits is more than enough to run phones, video, etc. What do you need for a phone? Pretty basic stuff. You need an IP phone. I have a picture of one of them here. There are many. In fact, you don't even have to buy an IP phone. You can use a soft phone called microSIP, which I will also show you later. You just need your phone, You need an internet connection that's represented by this Motorola box here. You need some kind of a device to connect to the AREDN mesh. And I run you right back to the microchip again, because you need something to provide an internal IP address to any device that you want to connect to the AREDN mesh network. The microchip router provides that. I don't work for microchip, by the way. What do you need for anything else? Basically the same thing, and a computer. How could you learn more? I highly encourage you guys go to the AREDN Mesh website and sign up for their forum. It's free. Just look around, ask questions. You know, the guys that monitor this, and I do from time to time, they're very, very interested in promoting the AREDN Mesh network and answering questions. They're generally nice, and you know, they are some of the guys on there are extremely knowledgeable. So take advantage of it. You can also go to the Orange County Mesh organization, which is kind of the original group of people who meet once a month. We do have some kind of expert level meetings. We call it the symposiums, and we go over kind of you know, the state of affairs, and we talk about exercises that may be coming up and coordinations with different groups like OC Races, American Red Cross, etc. And if you don't like to read, YouTube has a lot of videos. Okay, I want to, before I move on, any questions on the material so far? Just raise your hand. Okay, great.
I was slow. Yeah, I had a question about you when you said that you can share the internet, and I was wondering how they deal with sort of the you know, HTTPS sites that are encrypted, which you can't do over amateur radio, and how do they have that sorted out?
Okay, good question. And you're probably familiar with the whole FCC ruling. I can't off the top of my head tell you, but basically it says this: it's prohibited to encrypt any message being sent over the public amateur radio frequencies with the intention of, how does it go?
Obfuscation.
Yeah, basically you can't use code words, any of that stuff, right? So there's a good school of, there's two schools of thought on HTTPS. And the first one says, that's encrypted, you can't do that. The other one says, I'm not encrypting it for the purpose of obfuscating or hiding the content of my message. I'm just using HTTPS because that's all that's available on the internet today. You can't find any websites that are not HTTPS. In fact, some web browsers, I think Chrome included, don't even work anymore on, well, take that back, not Chrome. But eventually they're going to phase that out. They won't have any more HTTP. So, you know, another school of thought is that, you know, well, I password protect things. Isn't that encryption? Yeah, you know, it is. You're protecting people from accessing your network or your website or whatever. So the official ruling from the FCC currently on HTTPS is that there isn't one. Part 90, I think it's a gray area. I think that if you're intending to pass secrets over the AREDN mesh, you should not do that. I think that if it's just, there's no other way except to do it by HTTPS, then do it. You know, it's entirely up to you. Generally speaking, we avoid encrypted technologies, and you can see here on my screen that the router itself is not using encrypted technologies, nor are any of the devices that are on the AREDN mesh. So we avoid it. If we have to use it, you know, we're going to use it.
Thanks.
Yes. So generally, I guess the answer is it's illegal. I guess. I'm not a lawyer, and there's plenty of debate. Let's see. Okay, so what we're looking at here is my half light. My half light is just one part of my network. I don't have any other nodes connected to it at the moment. If I did, you would see them as my current neighbors. But what I do have is I have current neighbors that are connected over a tunnel. So I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4 neighbors, including one in Anaheim, one in Yorba Linda, and the other 2 are up in, let's see, South County is KE6BXT. That's Don Hill. He's one of the owners of the majority of the Hilltop equipment around here. And K6PVR is one of the most well-known names, not coming to my head right now, up there in Simi Valley. So I've got multiple tunnels to the internet, to the AREDN mesh. I don't have any connection RF-wise, even though I have an American Red Cross right next to me, but they don't want to point their dish or add any dish, any nodes that point northbound. So American Red Cross is one of those that has decided to suck the internet or the AREDN mesh for themselves and not provide any help to anybody else. You don't want to be that guy. So connected to my half light, I have a PBX. If you're familiar with what voicemail is, that's what that is. I have a telephone, and I will demonstrate that in just a minute. But this is the web interface for that phone that I showed you. It's, by the way, it's connected not only to device on the mesh, but it's also connected to the Ham Shack hotline. So the Ham Shack hotline is sort of like a private phone network for ham operators that it goes all around the world. And you can pick up any extension on that network and dial 50160, and you'll get me here or anywhere I take that phone. So that's that. We have mesh chat. I mentioned before, during major deployments, emergencies and whatnot, especially exercises, mesh chat is one of the technologies that is commonly used. It's not the only chat technology. It just happens to be a good one. One thing we like about mesh chat is that it'll operate on just about anything. You know, I've got 4 or 5 little Raspberry Pis sitting around here. They're like Pi Zeros, which incidentally you can't find anymore, but the market will come back eventually. It also runs on any Linux box, so you can get, you know, any low-end Linux box will work. The mesh chat node, which is here in my house, whenever I type something onto here, it will sync with all of these other nodes that are connected throughout the AREDN mesh. And if you look here at the map, if I just do a search for mesh chat, I get 25 instances of the word mesh chat. So that's, you know, roughly probably a dozen or more actual mesh chat. I'm just kind of scrolling down through them. So anytime, as long as they're on the same mesh chat channel, which is the general zone called mesh chat, if I type something here like test 2020-0824, if I type something here and then I go look at one of these other mesh chat nodes, I will find my message. So let's just, you know, kind of pick another one here. So this is useful, you know, if you want to have a situation report, just a really quick one. You know, they're not very sophisticated, but let's see if this one actually synced up. This is KE6BXT. You would log into each one of them with your own call sign. And there it is. So this is a totally different mesh chat node. It happens to be Don Hills. I don't know the actual location, but I'm guessing because it says QTH half tunnel 226 that it's one of his MikroTik routers that he uses to provide people like myself with a tunnel. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, my mouse decided to die. You guys still there? Hold on, it's coming back. Hang on. Okay, I got it back. For some reason, am I still being heard?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, My computer just freaked out for a second there. I guess I was doing too much at once. Okay, we're back to normal. The next thing I can show you is a file server. This is kind of cool. You know, hey, you need your ICS forms in the field or whatever. You want to share photos, whatever you want to do. I have a file server here that I can allow people access to. Incidentally, I can make this work both in and outside of the mesh. So I can have public users accessing the same box, just coming through a different network card. But I'll just show that real quick. So what I put in here was the ICS forms in case we need those in the field. We can bring along a printer and just print them out. So I have a public directory in here, and this is just a basic file sharing system, but they can grab any of these, the forms and download them from the file share. So that's that. We have the Rocket Chat is similar to Mesh Chat. The difference with the Rocket Chat is that I actually sync with Slack using Rocket Chat, which I want to bring up an interesting point about that. To operate on the AREDN mesh, you have to have a license. So things like making phone calls outside of the AREDN mesh to a non-ham operator might be considered to be pushing it. Definitely, if you're the one initiating a contact outside of the mesh, so you from the mesh outside, that's fine. It's also fine for anybody to listen. We all know that it's perfectly legal to listen to a conversation that's happening from an amateur frequency, but it's not okay for a non-licensed person to communicate with a licensed person using that same frequency. Therefore, what I did is I created a server that actually synchronizes on its own between a Slack channel that's on the public internet and a chat server here, Rocket Chat, so that I can have these back and forth conversations. And the way it is legal is that if somebody posts something to the Slack channel, they're not directly communicating with my server that happens to be on the AREDN mesh. My server is going out and fetching information from the public server and bringing it back to the AREDN mesh connected server. That's how I'm doing that. And when I push something, like I said, it's coming from the licensed operator to the non-licensed operator. So that's legal. I was able to use this mesh chat server with our emergency management director, I guess, Janine Wilmuth at the, I want to say, City of Anaheim Emergency Planning Division. She was not present at the field day, but I was able to communicate with her using this chat tool right here. And all she had on her end was a phone loaded with Slack. So that's a demonstration of how I'm able to talk to a non-ham in an emergency function to exchange information back and forth. I also have a relay server. Now, the relay is WinLink. So let me just show it to you real quick if I can. Okay. Can you guys, you probably barely see this on screen, right? This is the RMS relay for WinLink. I'm just going to go back to the presentation real quick and just explain it. I'm sure we all know what WinLink is. We know we can use WinLink over Telnet if you have an internet connection available. You can also use WinLink over the AREDN mesh because it's TCP/IP based. So what a relay does is where you have an internet connection. And remember, I was saying if anybody on the internet, I mean on the mesh, has an internet connection, they can provide the link to the outside world. So since I have an internet connection, anybody who gets onto the AREDN mesh, whether they're over a tunnel or whether they're on the RF side, they can use my RMS relay to relay a WinLink message from the AREDN mesh to the WinLink CMS network and vice versa. Very useful. I'm developing, I haven't quite figured it out, but there is a way to receive messages and forward them off to HF. You know, I can run a WinLink station to forward those messages to the RF side. Let me see here. Let me go back to the list. And I have webmail. And again, I was telling you about on the chat side of things, I can load this so that people that are not ham operators can use my mail server if they don't want to use or cannot, because if you're not a licensed ham operator, you can't use WinLink. But what you can do is you can use webmail. This webmail server is accessible both through the mesh and outside. If you go to, I think it's mail.km6zpo.com, I think is the public side of it. But this enables people to send messages back and forth in attachments and whatnot. It's all web-based, so, you know, works great over the mesh. And like I said, if I want to create an account for Janine or anybody else who's a non-ham, they can access this same webmail server over the public internet. And that is completely fine. Let's see what else we got here. Oh, the very last thing, cameras. So I'm going to show you the camera that's sitting out on my balcony. I think my wife's out there too. Let's see. There are many cameras on the mesh. Some of them are password protected, some are not. This one is mine, and it's just sitting on the balcony out there. You guys are getting a kind of a low quality feed because you're looking at it through Zoom, but it's actually a high quality camera. And that is that. I'm going to go back to my presentation and the next slide, which is questions.
I have a question. So this may be obvious, but you haven't actually said it. So when you buy these commercial routers like the MikroTik, I assume you then load some open source or something, some other kind of firmware on them. Is that what you have to do?
Correct. On the AREDN Mesh website, which has a list of supported devices here, there is a section called software, and you would go into the download area. I would read the documentation first about how, because they actually have a loading procedure for each type of device. You would download the firmware here, and depending on the kind of device it is, it might be an instance where you can load into the factory firmware and just upload the current firmware into it, replacing the factory firmware, or it may be a bit more complicated. You know, like some of the Ubiquiti devices where you have to use a TFTP client and actually get that thing into a mode where it will accept new firmware. They did a very good job of describing each one of these devices, and you know, especially the MikroTik stuff, because it's so common. Step-by-step guidance is available here in the docs area. So in right here, let's see the latest docs. It actually tells you how to do this. But is it easy? You know, no, it's not really that easy. Let me just show you this over here. It's going to be in installing firmware. Probably the easiest one in here is like the TP link, I think was the easiest. But if I go down to like MikroTik first install process, it's all in here, you know, exactly, you know, get a Pixie server client. So that's where the advanced networking, you know, is involved, is in the loading of firmware. To help, and I can help you get them loaded.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
We used to have loading parties. You know, people would just bring their device, and you know, before I got into the AREDN Mesh, I've heard about these loading parties. I haven't seen one since COVID, but that would be a great place for everyone to do hands-on, you know, loading of the devices. It's not that complicated after you've done a couple of them. Bart?
Yeah, I'm sort of baffled by some of this. Perhaps it's because I'm not clear on exactly why you would even need AREDN. It seems to me that in every case it's terminating at an internet connection. So if your internet is down, what good is it going to do?
Good question. I've given you some examples where if the internet is available at some point of an AREDN mesh, that the functionality would be extended. However, it's not necessary. You can do phone calls, video, you can do WinLink, you could do email, you could do all of those things without any internet connection whatsoever.
Even over a long distance?
If you've got enough nodes in the chain, yes.
Okay, but right now I get the impression, just looking at that map you showed, that first of all, there aren't that many nodes in Orange County. And secondly, if I wanted to talk, let's say I needed to, there's an emergency, we were working through Sacramento or San Francisco as an example, are there enough nodes in between that it would work, or are there certain places in the country and so forth there's gaps in it? What's the coverage?
Okay, so can you get to Sacramento? I suppose you can, because the greater Southern California network is connected with the greater Northern California network through RF. There's at this time, there's some connections that are missing in the Central California area that are being worked on actually by some students, and I think it's Cal State Santa Barbara, I want to say, don't quote me on that, but yes, there are gaps everywhere. The coverage in our area is best represented by the OC Mesh website, and I'll just briefly show you that. Orange County Mesh. They have charts up here that can show you exactly. But to your point, you said it looks like there's not much activity here in Orange County. Well, I would agree with that, and this is why we need ground level activity. It's a tough sell, right? How do I sell you into something that you've never tried before? It's not like I'm trying to give you a new frequency that in a new radio that's a $1,500 radio. This is a existing technology that's been around a good 20 years, and it's been in use the entire time. So let me show you some of the coverage maps. Let's see, for example, Pleasant Peak is a good one, because that's probably the one that you guys are gonna be using if you have a long range. So this is the equipment on top of Pleasant Peak right now. This is the coverage for 3 gigahertz. It shows you everything about it, and it shows you the coverage map. So let's look where we at Fullerton. It looks like you guys have coverage if you want to connect to the hilltops. Does that mean it's going to work for you? You don't really know, because you don't know what's in the way. But you can do some assessments. People like myself who have 2G and 5G dishes, and if I have enough influence, I might go out and buy a 3G dish just to do these site surveys. That's how you kind of have to start, is by having somebody help you with a site survey. Bring a dish to your house and see if it'll connect. But in your neighborhood level, that it would be like within Fullerton, you don't need the long range dishes. You only need a couple people that are connected to the mesh through RF, like the guy up in Yorba Linda. So if you can kind of visualize starting with your member up in Yorba Linda and moving down the chain into Fullerton, if every one of you has these nodes on, and you don't need a giant dish on your roof, you just need a couple of those nodes back to back on different channels. in order to repeat the signal from place to place along the chain. So right now, I would say, in the Orange County area, we might have maybe a dozen people with the stuff on their houses. Probably a lot of people that have tried this stuff and just said, not for me. They didn't want to put it on the roof. So there's definitely, a lack of coverage here and there. Let me look at the local map. Let's see, because I have the local mesh map.
So I'll just chime in. I know that you can hit Pleasants Peak from much of Fullerton on 2 meters with about a watt, because there's an APRS node up there that I can hit easily with a handheld. Of course, that doesn't mean it's going to work at 2.4 gigahertz, but it's generally line of sight from lots of places in Fullerton.
Yeah, you're right. It's a different frequency, and it may or may not work. But you can see the map here with these green lines. These are the long-range connections between Pleasants Peak and parts of Sierra Madre up here. This is actually the JPL area. They're pretty active. The gray lines that you can see on I'm not sure if I zoom in, maybe you can see it better. The gray lines are the tunnels. So we're actually, we use the tunnels to connect what I call disparate areas. That is like my house, that's not served with any sort of RF connectivity. Now, and these are more live than the map these are the actual nodes. But in some cases, like where I used to live here in Anaheim Hills, it shows there's a node on the map, but there's no, if you go to it, there's nothing there, right? So it's because it's offline, because I haven't taken it off. I don't know how to take it off the map once it's been placed. But if you have a microtik, and if you have at least an internet tunnel, you will be able to check the status of things, such as up here in Pleasants Peak. I can actually look at the node, and I am connected to it over the tunnel, which is connected to somebody. Somebody in the mesh has an actual connection, but I can see the status of the node up on Pleasants Peak by looking at it right here. I can also see, a whole lot of other people in my neighborhood. So it's not that it's not happening. It's definitely there. Go ahead, Bart.
I'm sort of confused about something here. Throughout your talk, you've used a lot of acronyms and terminology I haven't heard before without defining what it really is.
Yeah.
What do you mean by a tunnel versus a node versus, all these other connections?
Sure. So a tunnel is a virtual private network that's connected over the internet between two devices that are connected to the AREDN mesh. It is in networking terms, it's a secret tunnel that's going out over port 5525 over the internet. No one else can get in it except for you and the other node. You're creating a extended network. And I can show that in my tunnel settings. So if I go,
like the dark web you're talking about?
No, it's not the dark web. No, it's more like how business and the world works. It's when you have two corporate offices that are in different locations. If you want to be on the same internal network, you need to have some kind of a virtual private network connecting the two locations. And that's essentially what it is.
Let me see if I can help. So Bart, if you had two nodes, so a node is essentially a computer that can run all these different services. If you had two nodes that you couldn't connect by RF, let's suppose we were trying to connect your house with my house, and the 5 freeway or something is blocking the line of sight path. So ideally you'd want to connect by RF, but if that's not possible, then it's sort of like cheating. We can connect our two networks together using the internet in a way that other people can't see. And it's just kind of a way of bridging those gaps. It's not ideal, but it's a way, and I guess in my mind, the main reason for tunneling would be while you're building this network out and people are trying to learn how this works, you can kind of use all of the services that the network provides, even if you don't have the RF connectivity, which is what you really want to have is all RF, right?
Yeah, eventually. Yes.
Thanks. It's very helpful.
Yeah, and again, I'm not the networking guy. I'm sorry that I don't have a better, description of that. There are some of us actually are network engineers in this, community of people, and they are the ones I go to for those answers like you asked. But basically, these are my 4 internet tunnels. By the way, those internet tunnels are very handy. If I take one of my small devices, which I don't have present, but I have a little AREDN dongle. It's essentially a little Wi-Fi card, if you can imagine. It looks like it looks just like this. This is a Belkin Wi-Fi adapter, and you plug this into a laptop. The one that's made for AREDN looks almost identical to this, but it's got the special firmware. So I can go to, for example, Starbucks, and if I can connect to that network, that Wi-Fi network. Starbucks may not be the best example because it's actually, it requires a special login, but any network where the Wi-Fi user and SSID and password, I can connect this into the computer, and then this connects to that person's internet, and then it creates a tunnel that connects to a home router, which is connected to the AREDN mesh, and therefore you could be on the AREDN mesh anywhere. That's kind of useful when the cell phone services and the internet are still up. For example, if I wanted to get onto the AREDN mesh by using my phone's hotspot, works really well.
Mark, question. I remember at the Pacificon, and I can't remember if it was 2012 or 2016, but someone did a presentation from the city of Cupertino, and they had quite a sophisticated network set up. Is that AREDN they're using? Do you have any knowledge of that in the Bay Area?
Well, it wouldn't be the city of Cupertino specifically. It wouldn't be the government that would be running the AREDN mesh because they wouldn't be able to. The AREDN mesh is amateur by definition, and so therefore the government wouldn't be able to own it.
Well, I think it was their ARES or RACES or something like that. I mean, they were hams, but they were working for the government, for the city emergency. They were like CERT people. Yes,
that would be a valid use. It being an ARES organization, using it for emergency purposes, and they have licenses. The government can buy the equipment; they just can't use it. They still have to have the operators to be able to use the equipment, and they do that. Every city pretty much that has a RACES or an ARES team, they fund, in many cases, the equipment that's used by the ham operators that are on the team. Not all of them.
Okay, we're at 8 o'clock, so we don't want to keep you here all night because we do have a tendency to go on and on if we when we can. So if you want to take some questions and then wrap things up, that'll probably be good.
Yeah, I could take a couple questions, and as I said, I'll send it to Bob. I'm going to send you the presentation, and then you can distribute it as you see fit. I'll also give you some access to the video somehow, figure that out, that you can then publish however you see fit. Again, join the AREDN forums. Feel free to email me directly if you would like. My call sign is Kilo Mike 6 Zulu Papa Oscar and that happens to be my website as well. So you can go to Kilo Mike 6 Zulu Papa Oscar.com. You're going to find some interesting experiments that I've done with AREDN mesh, and also with a few other things that I've learned in the past 3 years about HF and VHF and a bunch of other cool stuff, solar. if that's it, if there's no further questions, I just want to say thank you very much. I'm honored and privileged to speak to you, gentlemen. And I'd be happy to answer any questions offline. Just email me and we can set up some time. I do have a day job, but I'll get to you pretty quickly if it's emailed to me.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. This was very interesting to me. I'll be in touch with you. Thanks again.
You're welcome. And this is Kilo Mike 6 Zulu Papa Oscar signing off.
73.
73.